I believe there is a path to peace. It depends a lot on the United States, NATO allies, the British. If we provide the Ukrainians with the support that they need to push the Russians back toward their internationally recognized borders, that can lead to peace. That can lead to some discussions with the Russians at some point. But it does depend on our support, the Western support for Ukraine as it defends itself against the Russians.
And is that support in doubt?
There are questions about that support here in Washington. I understand there are questions in parts of Europe. Most parts of the NATO alliance, I understand, are pretty solid. The UK seems to be pretty solid. The rest of Western Europe seems to be pretty solid. Most of Eastern Europe seems to be pretty solid. We have worries about the Hungarians and the Slovaks. Here in Washington, there are voices who are beginning to ask questions that we didn't hear earlier in this war about the support. But I would just emphasize that these voices are in the minority. They're in the minority. They're loud sometimes. Sometimes these minority voices can be influential in our House of Representatives, which makes people worry, as they rightly should. But my sense is that there is still strong bipartisan support for Ukraine and bipartisan support for assisting Ukraine in its defense against the Russians. And so when it comes to a vote, sooner or later, it will come to a vote, the assistance package for Ukraine. And my bet is it will pass.
Well, that is interesting. What about? I'll come on to what the Russians might accept in a minute. What about a change in leadership in America? If, for example, we were to see Donald Trump return as president, what would that mean for any move to resolving this conflict?
Well, we don't know. All former President Trump has said is that he would resolve this quickly, to which President Zelensky has said, well, we'd like to see how he would do that, because he'd like to resolve it quickly, too, on his terms, President Zelensky. But in answer to your question about President Trump, former President Trump, it's not clear what his policy would be. We have seen in the past that President Trump and President Putin have gotten along very well, which is surprising. We have seen former President Trump, make some statements that cause people to question his commitment to the NATO alliance, which is also troubling. So we don't really know what his policies would be. We'll find out more, presumably, come the campaign, if he's the nominee. And if he were to be elected, then we would find out then. But he hasn't said very much very clearly.
Mm. Is it fair to say that that countries, including the United States, can continue to provide weapons to Ukraine? However, is it fair to say that it's unlikely that in a hand-to-hand conflict that it is unlikely that Russia would be defeated, and that the only real peace plan to peace is an actual negotiation, either indirectly or directly, between Zelensky and Putin? And for that to succeed, have you heard or seen any change in attitude from President Putin in terms of giving back the land that they have won in Ukraine?
No signs from President Putin or his spokespeople that they are willing to give back land that they now occupy back to the Ukrainians, the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. There's no indication that he's willing. Indeed, his foreign ministry spokesperson, as recently as today, said that they would not negotiate until the Ukrainians give up all the land, even some of the land that the Russians don't yet occupy. So there's no indication that they're willing to sit down at this point. However, let me go back to your first point, Asma. That is, there it is possible that it could be a stalemate, as we've seen, that might or might not lead to some kind of conversation. But it's also possible, just possible, that the Ukrainians will be able to push the Russians back again if we support them, if we provide the kinds of equipment and weapons, ammunition, other technology that they have said they need, and have said that if they get it, they can make progress. If that happens, then it's possible that the Russian military would not be able to withstand that kind of an attack.
And that equipment is just longer range missiles?
It's a range of equipment. It does have to do with long-range missiles. It also has to do with the F-16 fighter jets that are coming. The training goes on right now. That will come. It has to do with the volume, the number, the quantity of these weapons in order to give the Ukrainians the edge. We know that the Russians are bigger. We know that the Russians have more population. Do you know that the Russian economy is larger than the Ukrainian economy? But we also know that the economies of those nations that are supporting Ukraine vastly dominate the size of the Russian economy. So the Ukrainians do have the possibility of pushing the Russians back.